Hi everyone, it's Yvette Blowitz from spiritgirl.com and welcome to Feel Good From Within. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Eve Rodsky, who is a New York Times bestselling author of Fair Play. So with her acclaimed New York Times bestseller and Reese's book club pick Fair Play, Eve Rodsky ignited a national conversation about greater equity in the home. But she soon realized that even when the domestic workload becomes more balanced, people still report something missing in their lives. We're going to be talking to Eve today about her brand new book, Find Your Unicorn Space, Reclaim Your Creative Life in a Too Busy World. I picked this copy up from Big W Australia and I love everything it's about. I'm so grateful we're here today with Eve. How are you, Eve?
Hi, Yvette. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to our global audience who's tuning in. I can't wait to share more about Eve, her book, and how we can find our unicorn space. Eve, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into your book?
Well, I will tell you that nice bio you read. I did not set out to be sparking any gender global conversations or an expert on the gender division of labor. That wasn't what was on my third grade. What do you want to be when you grow up board, Yvette? It probably said veterinarian or astronaut. But what happened to me was that in my own life, many things happened where I'm a Gen X woman who had been told that I could smash every glass ceiling along the way if I wanted to. And I had very big dreams. I wanted to be president of the United States and a senator at the same time, a dancer for the Knicks, which is one of our basketball teams in the NBA, and do it all while being president because I could just fly Air Force One in and dance on the Madison Square Garden floor while also legislating. I had these huge, major dreams. And instead of smashing glass ceilings, what I found myself was really 13 years later, if you think from when I had those big dreams, really just smashing peas for my toddler, Zach, and while breastfeeding a newborn baby, Ben, at the same time as the job. I wasn't president, but I did like my job. I was a lawyer who worked at the intersection of philanthropy and governance. And I really liked the families I worked with and my clients, my big bank. But my job basically wasn't there for me after maternity leave. I had lost all my direct reports. I was told that if I wanted to breastfeed, it would have to be in a beautiful place called a broom closet. And on top of that, there's no social safety net in the US. So we've been taught to believe the best way to raise our children is in these small nuclear families away from extended family in complete isolation. So while I was losing support from my partner, my husband, Seth, who went back to work 2 days after our baby was born each time, I was also losing support from my workplace. And on top of that, everybody said, just wait till you get to preschool because you'll finally get support from the people around you when you get to your preschool, because those are the families you'll know for the rest of your life. They'll be with you at your kids' weddings, knock on wood. They'll be there for you if you need a cup of sugar, all those things that I had been lacking. And then when I got to finally meet all those people the first day I show up at Zach's preschool, they gave us name tags. And I looked down at my name tag, Yvette, and it said Zach's mother. And so I remember thinking, these are the people that are going to know me better than anyone's ever known me and going to be my social supports. They don't even know my name. And so that is how I came to this work. In a basic acid rainstorm of erasure of my identity and overwhelmed by being the default parent, called the she-fault parent, because even though it can happen to different genders, this is an issue that applies most likely to women, especially women married to men. I just decided that I was mad as hell and I wasn't going to take it anymore. And that was how I got curious about these topics of women, their identity, what happens to our time, why are we not allowed to be unavailable from our roles? Why does society frown on me, Eve, being anything other than a parent, a partner, and or a professional?
That's such an empowering story where you made a decision to show up to be more than that name tag, that label of Zach's mother. And it just reminded me how we get labeled in society, and that can be a limiting label, a limiting life, and a limiting belief. So it's incredible that you made a decision not to become only that label. In your book, you actually talked about your mum and how you got involved at a young age in civil rights. And you shared a mother-daughter memory of chanting the civil rights in New York City. Do you feel her influence has really helped you when it comes to helping women find their unicorn space?
Absolutely, Yvette. I think the messages my mother always told me were I was not going to be the center of her life. And I think as a kid, especially in a single parent household where my father was not around, he left our family when she was pregnant with my younger brother, and we were being raised basically in a tenement in the Lower East Side of New York in the 80s. That was a difficult place to grow up. It definitely makes you resilient, I'll say that. But what was so interesting was even in those tough circumstances for her, she was from an Orthodox Jewish family who sort of rejected the fact that she was divorced and was going to live in New York City and wanted a career. She had me and my younger brother, and she was on her own. Her idea was I'm taking back my maiden name. So that was one big thing she did. I grew up as Eve Madison. She became Terry Mizrahi again. So I remember her talking about how important names are. And then the second thing she did, she said, I have a big dream of being a professor of social work, of getting tenure, of not just working as a social worker, but really teaching social justice. So that's what she did. She worked nights and she taught classes until finally she was able to get tenure at this Hunter College School of Social Work. Through that whole process, I was watching her leave us by ourselves as latchkey kids to teach at night. And I kept thinking, why is she doing this? I see all these other mothers who are on all these class field trips. They're putting their children at the center of their lives. My mother is not doing that. But I will say that was my biggest gift, Yvette. It was my biggest gift because I realized I'm not the center of anybody's life. And I think that's an important lesson to learn early, or else, you can be very disillusioned or narcissistic. But on the other side of it, I think what it really taught me was that I didn't have to give up my dreams, no matter how hard life got.
Wow, that's such an empowering story. What your mum did, she also made a decision that she was going to become who she wanted to become. When it comes to writing, obviously you wrote your first book, Fair Play. How did that come about?
Well, I'm a private citizen and I'm a lawyer, and my clients, Yvette, look like the HBO show Succession type families. They're very difficult. Your listeners should feel bad for me. But what I do for those families is I create grace and humor and generosity in their most difficult organizational decisions. And I do that as a lawyer. I come at life with sort of a organizational management and behavior design lens. That's a very private job. And no one's really ever asked me that question. But what I will say is that it was very uncomfortable, Yvette, to go from this private person who's a lawyer for other people who really never even had an Instagram presence because I didn't want my clients to see me dancing on tables, to start to assert my voice in a way that's uncomfortable and is going to trigger a lot of different people, a more public type figure. And I'd say that transition was really hard, but it really happened because organically over the early years of really around that time I was telling you about, where I was being erased from my job and from my own identity, on top of holding and shouldering all of the unpaid labor for my family and my relationship sort of falling apart. What I realized about that time in my life, if I look back on it, is that I had a choice. My choice was I could sort of eat, pray, love it out of my marriage. That was a very popular narrative at the time, but privileged narrative for sure, because I had two young kids, harder to do that. I could sort of resign myself to doing it all and become a gray version of myself. I could do what a lot of my friends were doing, I was watching become more empowered in their careers. They kept saying there was a magic 3 words, and that those 3 words are court ordered custody. So they were getting more freedom and more power in their lives by being able to share custody because they had every other weekend off. Or I could get my ass in gear and become my own client. And Yvette, that's how this process started. It didn't start because I said I want to write a best-selling book about chores and housework. There's no best-selling books about chores and housework, believe me. What it started was asking the most important question I think I've ever asked in the past decade, which was, why is it that we don't treat our homes as our most important organizations? Why is it that my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group has more clearly defined expectations in the home? You don't bring snack twice to that group, you're out. Whereas the home, Yvette, no one's going into their offices and saying, hey, what should I be doing today? I'll just wait here till you tell me what to do. So why is it that we create agency for ourselves in our Mahjong groups, in our workplaces, but the domestic dynamic is so different than how we act anywhere else? Whereas one man said to me, well, my home, Eve, is a place where we wait to decide who's taking the dog out every single day, right when it's about to take a piss on the rug? Why is it that we don't make decisions in advance? Why don't we bring any of the rigor that we bring to anywhere else to our homes? And I think when I became my own client, because that's what I do, I bring organizational rigor to family systems. When my own house became my own family system and I started to experiment with the secret formula that I teach my clients, which is you can thrive in your organization if you have three things. And those three things are boundaries, systems, and communication. Once I started to apply that to my own home, then all of a sudden other people started to use our system. And then we had more and more beta testers who became more and more high profile. And then it sort of culminated in you really have something unique here and you should write it up.
Wow, that's incredible. And were you super excited when Reese Witherspoon, who I must say is such a beautiful role model? I grew up in the era of my only role model was Oprah Winfrey, as an example, and Louise Hay, these incredible women sitting on stage. It was the first time I ever saw women sitting on
Yeah.
stage talking about self love and self help. And I'm so blessed. I mean, today, young children or girls or people, especially the younger generation, are growing up with hundreds of thousands of influences. And when I
Mm.
think of someone who is such an incredible influence for the younger generation, I particularly go Reese Witherspoon. She embodies just this beautiful, kind, loving heart and this natural ability just to be herself and show up as she
Authenticity,
is.
like you said.
Yeah,
Yeah, your value.
authenticity.
Yes, yes.
And obviously, we know that reading books is much better than spending 5 hours on TikTok or Instagram. So I love that she's keeping that tradition of book reading up for all ages. Were you just over the moon when Reese
Mhm.
Witherspoon read your book? Like, how did that make you feel? And then you became one of her book club picks because her book club is huge.
Well, I think it's funny you say that because, well, A, Reese is a single mom. So I also want to, shout that out. I think that's why Fair Play was interesting to her was this idea of really this love letter to single mothers and how much they hold, whether you're a stay-at-home mother, whether you're a working parent, but just how much caregiving is part of our humanity and we don't really talk about it. And so it actually was a really very beautiful thing because my book was picked. I still remember this, the October book club pick in 2019. So this is before the pandemic. Why are you not picking a spooky fiction Halloween book, or a thriller, and you're picking this random book about domestic labor? Aren't women fine? Aren't we okay? And then I think, she looked sort of prescient and like she is a forward thinker because then when the pandemic came, and I had warned in the first chapter of Fair Play that we are one crisis away from losing 30 to 40 years of women's workforce participation rate. And what I meant by that was not a global pandemic. I meant the burnout crisis I was seeing in women who are holding and shouldering all the unpaid labor for their family and working for pay, and the hair loss, insomnia, mommy juice, alcohol, edibles, things that are used to numb yourself to get through your life, cancer diagnosis, thyroid problems. So I was seeing a really very gloomy picture for women even before the pandemic. And I think Reese also felt like this was a message, a hard message to hear. Yes, we're breathing polluted air. And yes, this is because of sexism and assumptions as opposed to structured decision making. But women are also complicit in their own oppression because we've been hearing these messages since birth. This is a triggering podcast. These are triggering books that I write because what I'm saying to women is that the messages you've been told since you're born are wrong. And we've been forced to believe these things that end up trapping us in systems and in lives that we don't want. And those are hard messages, Yvette.
Find Your Unicorn. What does the title of that book mean?
Well, I think it was alarming to me, Yvette, because I would ask provocative questions during my fair play research. Because now we have like the longest longitudinal study of couples and unpaid labor, I would probably say in the world. We have 17 countries. We have polyamorous relationships, LGBTQIA relationships, single mothers, roommates, obviously women married to men, men married to women, just so many different family structures. And I think the beauty of and the alarm of what I was hearing, especially from women, came from provocative questions like, close your eyes, your kid's school is calling. you see the school pop up on your phone, don't pick it up. Don't pick it up. How do you feel if you see the school calling and you're not picking up? And would describe either their heart pounding or that they thought their kid was sick or shaking. Like even the imagery of not being available was triggering stress responses for women. Whereas when I asked men that question, it was like, well, I'll just call the school back. I keep my phone on airplane mode. Like, yeah, of course I wouldn't pick up. So it was just like, wait a second, there's a whole other way to live out there. I want to live like that. I want to live like that because what you're meaning if you turn your phone on airplane mode or you're not worried is you think someone else is going to be there to pick up that call, right? So that's what the second book is about. Find Your Unicorn Space is a book about that permission to be unavailable from your roles. It is a book about you as a person, but especially if you're a woman, especially if you're married to a man, and especially if you have kids, being able to have consistent space to be interested in your own life. Because back to that boundary, systems, and communication secret formula, Yvette, systems is fair play. That's the easy part because people are used to owning things in their office, in their mahjong groups. So the idea of owning dinner, okay, that means I have to actually plan the menu and make sure that the groceries are in the refrigerator. That's what fair play is about, an ownership mindset. The systems was the easy part. But why people weren't adopting it, I realized, was because of the boundaries. The boundaries around their time, the boundaries around their availability. And that's why I had to write a whole second book about it. Because I can't get people to adopt systems until they believe that their time is as valuable as their partners. And that's the problem. Unicorn Space is a book that says, like the mythical equine, time for you, consistent space for you to be interested in your own life outside of your roles as a parent, partner, professional, whatever those roles are, is a fucking unicorn. It doesn't exist unless we can reclaim it together. And that's why I wanted to come on here because I love when people read Unicorn Space, especially as a book club, because I think there's a lot of exercise you can do together. It becomes really fun to ask your friends instead of, what are you doing this weekend? What are your values? Find out more about your friends in a deep way. And that's what this book is about. It's about really challenging us to go beyond just self-care because a walk around the block, a drink with a friend, that's the baseline. That's just humanity. That is just like breathing. You need those things as a connected Homo sapien. But what you need also is more. You need more than a haircut or a manicure every week. What you need is to be able to say, the most important thing I did today was outside my roles as a parent, partner, and professional. Not every day, but there should be consistent days where you say to me, the most important thing I did today is blank. And it wasn't as your role as a mother. It wasn't in your role as a roommate. It wasn't in your role as a partner. It wasn't in your role as a professional. And so what I would argue, Yvette, is that whether you make $1 from this podcast or $1 billion, this is a unicorn space for you because I got to listen to you. And what you have is the three things that a unicorn space is. It is curiosity. I wonder, and you find guests to answer those curiosities. You connect with others. And you complete it. As bad as you thought the interview goes, you still edit it and get it out into the world. That cycle of curiosity, connection, and completion is why a unicorn space is not just a walk around the block. It is a consistency of being interested in your own life that requires curiosity, connection, and sharing with others, and completion of something, that it's not an unfulfilled dream. And that's why, again, it took a whole book to explore all those different 3 C's because there's actually hurdles at each C.
Yes. And the hurdles, when you were writing your book, your son wanted to come into your unicorn space. Can you share a little bit of an insight to that? That actually cracked me up in the book. When I was reading that, I was like, whoa, the unicorn space. Her little son's coming into the unicorn space.
To invade it.
What does your unicorn space look like?
Well, I can show it to you. It's my writing nook in my house. I have my kids' art up. I have my diploma to remind myself that I am highly educated and that education was one of the ways out for me of a very working class life. I have my wallpaper that has Ruth Bader Ginsburg on it. I don't know if you can see it, but
everyone
anyway,
can go to the Spirit Girl channel to check out Eve's unicorn
office,
space.
Yes. And I have actual unicorns. I have little unicorns behind me. But what was happening was that during the pandemic, because Seth and I have been playing Fair Play for a decade now. So what I want to tell your listeners is that the things we're talking about took me 10 years to unlearn, and we're asking people to do it in, 30, 40 minutes. So this is just a 101 primer to some of these messages that may be hard to hear. If you're somebody who says, I'm not exactly sure, I may have a passion gap. One woman tagged me in a reel yesterday that I thought was really interesting that said, point of view, you quit your full-time job 4.5 years ago to stay home with your 2 under 2, which turned into 3 under 3. And now they are all off to school and you are alone in a quiet house for the first time and you don't know what to do with yourself. That was from a woman named You, the Mother. That is what the second book is about. Even if that's not your exact scenario, if you're somebody who's been in the workplace but feel completely burnt out, what we're here to tell you is that the antidote to burnout, it's not just that walk around the block or a drink with a friend. It's being interested in your own life. And that's a harder sell. And it's why I took a whole book. But what was happening in my unicorn space, which I have been very good about establishing my boundaries, is that during the pandemic, when everything collapsed on all of us and we were all in the same place, those boundaries were being breached very consistently. We were going back to old patterns because Fair Play and Unicorn Space are a practice, Yvette. I wish I could tell you can have these conversations once. It's like exercise. Literally wish I could hike one time and be fit for the rest of my life. Like that's how much I hate exercise.
I think we all do.
I want to take one long hike and then never ever move again for 10 years and just sit and write and read. So that's not how good things happen. Similar to Unicorn Space and Fair Play, it's a practice. You lose your muscle even if you stop for a little bit. And that's what Seth and I had happen to us. And so my kids were busting in on me. So I started to wear a Post-it on my top of my boob that said unavailable. And then they kept busting in on me. And I said, do you not see my Post-it? It says unavailable. And they kept on busting in. And then finally my son came in for the last time. And I said, what do you want? And he said, Mom, your Post-it is falling off. And I was
like, that was so funny to read.
Your Post-it is falling off. Get out of here. So that didn't work. The book is really about how Seth and I had to start over, really create these permissions to be unavailable for each of us. And we did it. It requires a lot of practice and communication. And that is unfortunately, or fortunately, the beauty of Unicorn Space. It does require these beautiful conversations. Yvette, you did one of the exercises in the book, and I would love to hear what you chose. But these are conversations you probably don't have that often. Like, choose your top 3 values. Tell me what your bottom 3 values are. How do you like to share yourself with the world? The book has a lot of questions that if you were on a desert island, what would you be doing there for a year? Difficult questions, but I think they're fun. They're not too difficult that they're hard to answer. And that's why I said I love when book clubs read this book together because you can sort of push each other to do the exercises.
Talk about a lot creative life. Have you found that some women and people, I forgot I love to paint or
Absolutely.
do pottery?
Yes. I say that's my favorite part of this book. Fair Play is really triggering. You hear more about like how people's marriages are now better. That's a more serious conversation, but the unicorn space conversations I have are just mind-blowingly beautiful, Yvette. And that's why my editor was sort of mad at me because I tell a lot of stories in the book. And she kept saying, do you need this many stories? But I did think I needed that many stories because I wanted people to see that creativity doesn't have to use a paintbrush, that you could be the oldest mother to ever ring the buzzer on American Ninja Warrior, or maybe there's an Australian Ninja Warrior. Creativity can look like getting the black belt with your child. Creativity can look like jumping into the Atlantic Ocean. As one woman said, she joined a polar bear club, which she was curious what it would feel like to jump into the cold ocean in winter. And so I think the beauty of this unicorn space is that instead of saying to yourself, well, I'm not an artist or I'm not creative, what I'd rather people say to themselves is there are 3 C's that this woman is telling me are important for my mental health and my longevity. And those C's are curiosity, connection, and completion. And so all I ask is that if it's something where it may be like, I can't believe I just did this again, that is the gift I want to give you all. I want to get us to a place where everybody says, I can't believe I just did that, as opposed to regret, I can't believe I just did that if we're like doom scrolling or watching too much TV. I can't believe I just did that. With hope, that feeling comes from when you start either at the curiosity place, the connection place, or the completion place. And so instead of thinking about, well, I'm not creative, think about to yourself, well, you know what? I'm really creative, but I have a really hard time completing my projects. So that would be, you want to focus on completion. If you're someone who says, well, I'm not creative, but I'm feeling lonely, I want to focus on connection. Then, like I said, maybe that's the polar bear woman. She didn't love to jump into the Atlantic Ocean when she was a kid. She didn't know anything about it, but she found a polar bear club close to where she lived in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is sort of near the ocean. Or it may be that you're just curious. You may want to start with a curiosity C, which is, I haven't felt curiosity in a while. And I just feel like I'm curious about what it would feel like to pick up a guitar. And that was my curiosity. I decided to start my C this summer was curiosity. I wanted to do something totally different and new. I picked up a guitar and I really was curious what it felt like to start playing chords. And it's been really an interesting journey, but fun.
And did you enjoy picking up the guitar and learning and playing? How did it make you feel?
Well, I love it so much because, again, with the unicorn space framework, I don't feel like I have to become U2 or like the best guitarist in the world. I don't need to become Slash. But what I can do, what I am doing is I'm learning one song, which is called All I Want Is You by U2, actually, because it's a pretty simple chord. It's just the A chord, a D chord, and F minor. F major minor. That one's the hard one to learn. So I'm sort of stuck right now in the rigor of learning the F minor, and that's hard. But what I want to tell people is that when you have an I can't believe I just did that moment, it's never because it's easy. It's these cycles of being interested in your own life and leveling up to levels that you may never have thought you could do. And the beauty of that, whether it's baking a perfect chocolate chip cookie for you, whether it's jumping in the Atlantic Ocean, whether it's doing parkour, so you're on these amazing ninja courses with some of the most fit men in the world, and you're a PE teacher who's 42 and has 3 kids at home, you'll surprise yourself with the journey.
Love that. You'll surprise yourself with the journey. And I think what's beautiful about your book, Find Your Unicorn Space, Reclaim Your Creative Life in a Too Busy World, it gives you the opportunity to expand, to grow. You mentioned curiosity, connection, completion. It opens you up to such a different world. And I think when it comes to mental health in particular, when we get bored with our life, that's when it can become very depressing. Or if we don't feel that we're learning something new. I think that's why I loved Find Your Unicorn Space so much, was because it just unleashed this opportunity of a new life, new things, excitement, interest. And if anyone can have the conversation where they've got to carve out their own unicorn space and go, I'm doing this, I think that's so empowering. It's like taking back your life and really just opening up to so many opportunities and possibilities. My mum's in aged care as an example, and they have a ukulele club.
I love it. I love it.
And this
I should take that too. Yes.
picked up a ukulele, and I'm like, man, I think I might learn a ukulele. I actually then heard that this woman picked up a ukulele and decided, I'm just going to join a ukulele club. I'd never played a ukulele. And now she's traveling all around Australia playing in ukulele clubs. I'm like, man, this just reminded me of Find Your Unicorn Space, where you're never too old to pick up any instrument. Now, Eve, I could talk to you forever about your book. I really loved all the stories, to be honest. I found the stories to be fascinating because I'm so curious. Every person's unicorn space was completely different. And then I loved how people overcame uncomfortable conversations and then got their husband on board. Seriously, this is my time. That's your time. Like, we've got to have our own time, and then we'll come together as a family. And I thought that's so empowering for kids to see, to go, when they grow up, then it's not going to be my job's just to do all the housework. Your husband goes off to play golf and the cycle continues. So it really is empowering. Now, how do you take care of yourself? Because you're always giving so much. You've just been working on a documentary. You got this book out. You are a busy mom. You got a lot going on. But what does your self-care rituals look like so you don't burn out?
Well, I think it's such a great question. For me, it was really, understanding the definition of mental health, Yvette, because like you said, it became a generational thing. So when researching this book, I talked to some of my favorite mental health professionals, and what a common theme was about the definition of mental health was, for you and what you say to your kids, you never want to say to your kids or to yourself, I just want to be happy. I just want you to be happy. So I laugh because my kids now, especially the one who busted in and said, your post-it is falling off when I had unavailability on my boob, he now says, I know, Mom, you don't want me to be happy. You want me to have the appropriate emotion at the appropriate time and the ability and strength to weather it. That's the true definition of mental health. Having the appropriate emotion at the appropriate time and the ability and strength to weather it. So all of my self-care rituals is based on that definition of mental health that came out of my research for Unicorn Space, because the ability and strength to weather it is what I care about. The umbrellas to the storms. It doesn't mean the storms are not going to come. It doesn't mean we're going to be happy all the time. But what it means is that if we have these experiences of happiness and meaning when they collide, which are these unicorn space, I can't believe I just did that moments, they shelter us like an umbrella from the rain. And I remember I was writing this book, which is a unicorn space. Writing for me is definitely a unicorn space. Researching, writing. I'm a lifelong learner. I love lifelong learning. That is one of my top values. And as I was researching this book and learning about all of this, I remember I was writing and Anna, my youngest, kicked me in the eye by mistake. She sort of lunged or whatever. And I got this like giant black eye. And I remember thinking to myself, I have an umbrella. I'm so glad I wrote a chapter this morning, because if I got kicked in the eye by my child this afternoon and I hadn't done this chapter for myself, this writing for myself, I would have weathered this experience a lot worse. And that's it. Life is full of mundane. It's full of assumptions. It's full of expectations on women's time. We often have very little. The universality of being a woman is that we will always be defined by our roles. We will have very little choice over how we spend our time according to society. But when you can push back and create these opportunities for umbrellas, then it makes the mundane and the expectations and the assumptions, all the other things, easier to weather.
So really, your self-care, you just love writing and really expressing yourself through written form. And that's such an important part of your self-care ritual and lifelong learning.
For sure.
Find your unicorn space. I really, really loved reading this book. I actually took some photos of my unicorn space at the time. I was reading this by the ocean and I was having a cup of coffee and I'm like, you know what? Reading is my unicorn space.
Remember, when you take your curiosity of books, you didn't just keep it there. That's why it's the 3 C's.
Yes.
I'll just explain, put words in your mouth. You had a curiosity for books. And then you decided to connect with the authors and connect with others through this podcast. And then, like I said, you did the difficult step of actually completing your first episode.
Yes.
That cycle is hard.
Exactly.
And so I just want to acknowledge that you did that. And you did that with this podcast. So it's very exciting to watch a unicorn space in action.
Thank you, Eve. That's so beautiful. And I'm so grateful for those kind words, especially as I grew up. My father's Aboriginal. I'm Aboriginal. I'm dyslexic, but constantly our messaging is you're going to not be able to read and write. Literacy is going to be a problem. It's quite a bit of a downer in terms of you're always going to be vulnerable, disadvantaged. You're not actually going to be any good at reading and writing. And quite often, whilst many people maybe haven't had that experience, that negativity, that labeling really, it weighs you down over time. Not that people can see it. People just go, oh, you're just a good reader. We all have a story. But I think I'm so grateful for my mum, Eve. She was very much, no, you're not going to believe that. And she took me to the library every Friday afternoon. And I'd sit and immerse myself with books. Not that I could read that good. I just looked at the pictures mainly. And she also bought me a little book every Friday, which was a golden book, and wrote, Dear Yvette, love mum, every single Friday. Just thank you so much from the bottom of my heart to even spend your precious time with us right around the world and to share your book, Find Your Unicorn Space. And it is part of the Spirit Girl Book Club.
Yay.
And obviously that's a big honor because you're part of Reese's book club pick. This book is out everywhere in Australia. It's online at booktopia.com.au. And now, Eve, before we say goodbye, what is your hope for your newfound book readers?
Well, my hope for you is that, and my homework assignment for you is what we said earlier, that you can share with us on social media at Fair Play Life, at Eve Rodsky, whenever you do something where you share that the most important thing you did that day or a very important thing you did that day is outside of your roles, because how you use your time, how you choose to use your time is actually changing the world for other women behind you. And so the more choice that you have over how you use your time, the more you reclaim your time for things that are magical and mythical, like a unicorn, the more that we are setting new habits and boundaries for women who come up behind us. So that's my wish, that you all share with us some really important things you do that day that make you say, I can't believe I just did that. And I wanted to let you know that I did.
I can't believe you did that. And I just want to let you know I did. I love that, to finish the podcast on such an empowering note. Now, Eve, how can we stay in touch with you after this podcast show?
Well, if you're interested in some of the tools, if you're a nerd like me and you like the science behind all of what I'm saying, then you can go to fairplaylife.com, because we have a newsletter that keeps you apprised of a lot of events in science. And then if you just want sort of more of the fun stuff, Fair Play Life is our handle, and it has all of these exercises, people sharing their unicorn space. And then if you just want to hear my political rants about American politics, you could always follow me personally at Eve Rodsky.
I love it. Well, you're definitely shaping the future for women, and any person can actually create a Find Your Unicorn space. I think, Eve, that if I had one wish for everyone listening in, take that label off. Because you started with someone trying to give you the label, which was Zach's mother. And look where we are today. A very different outcome. You're a New York Times bestselling author. You've written 2 books, doing the documentary, and helping women and people right around the world finding their unicorn space, reclaim your creative life in a too busy world. Thank you, Eve.
All right, big hugs to you. All right, we'll talk soon. Bye. Bye.
Thanks for listening in to Feel Good From Within with Yvette Blowitz, Spirit Girl Podcast. I hope you found this conversation of interest and benefit to you. In support, I would love for you to subscribe to Feel Good From Within with Yvette Blowitz, Spirit Girl Podcast on any podcast app you listen to this through, and to also leave a 5-star rating and a review of what you think too. Be sure to share this show with your family, friends, and community, and to subscribe to my mailing list at spiritgirl.com, yvettesbookclub.com, or feelgoodfromwithin.com, and to follow Spirit Girl, Yvette Blowitz, or Feel Good From Within on any social media app. And together, let's feel good from within.